So, today we're going to talk about fiction and safety within that fiction. I'm going to take the term fiction extremely broadly here to mean any creative enterprise involving creating a narrative that isn't real or true. Art can be a form of fiction, literature including comics, films, board games, role-playing games, computer games, these are all forms of fiction. Now, on the face of it, it seems obvious that this is a ridiculous conversation to be having. Fiction is inherently safe because it can't actually hurt you due to the fact that it's not real. Reading about someone being tortured won't cause you to have your balls electrocuted, right? However, some people seem to think that fictional narratives can, indeed, cause harm. And so, against all common sense, this does need to be something that we address. So where does this come from, this idea? It's hard to be certain, but it seems that a certain degree of meta-level criticism of works of fiction stems from the much more useful criticism that takes place of news media and advertising. We can quite rightly look to depictions of, say, women in advertising and say that this is unrepresentative, creates unrealistic standards of beauty and all the rest of it. You can say the same of Bumbling Dad and numerous other advertising stereotypes. And you can even say that advertising is a form of fiction, which is true to an extent, but advertising, like religion, is fiction that presents itself as true. This is how you should look, this is how you should be, this is what you must believe in order to be pretty, successful, smart, a good person, and so on. In news media, rightly, we criticise biased narratives because they're presented as fact, the news. Fox and others have undermined this by becoming more and more editorial in their quest for ratings, and that's why that kind of criticism has become more and more important there. Extending this criticism into fiction, however, seems to me to be about 1,000 steps too far. So a lot of this comes down to fact versus fiction, but what's the difference? It seems obvious, but is it? Why should we take unrealistic depictions of people in advertising seriously, but not take it seriously when a pneumatic and unrealistic depiction of a woman is found on the front of a comic book, oozing sexuality with more rippling muscles on show than a butcher's counter? The advertising is presenting an unrealistic depiction as some true, real and attainable ideal, while fiction presents the unreal as an escape. Gucci might actually expect you to want to be like that size 0 model with the heroin chic and will sell you on the idea that that's an attainable goal. DC Comics isn't trying to sell you on the idea that you can become a D-cup Amazon from a secret island, and at best the most comic book tales will impart here to you is some kind of simplistic moral lesson. Wartime propaganda is telling you to go out there and kill the enemy, and they mean for you to really do it. Sign up, see the world, meet interesting people, kill them and take their oil. Playing a first-person shooter is not. It's selling you an interactive, fictive experience as a distraction and escape from real life, not as something it actually wants you to do. Are there problematic ideas and concepts in fiction? You bet your sweet ass there are. And they tend to make the best stories. Why? Because they're affecting. They affect us emotionally, even if they don't modify our behaviour, even if we reject them, they have an effect. Extreme ideas, different ideas, wild ideas, ideas contrary to our experience, outside our experience, or even impossible and surreal, are engaging precisely because of that. The space that fiction provides is like a simulator inside our skulls, a wild and crazy area of possibility, a huge what-if machine. And it's safe. Nothing can actually hurt us here. Our imagination can frighten us, unsettle us, allow us to indulge our darkest fantasies, but in the end it all takes place safely inside our skulls, and it says absolutely nothing about us as a person as we interact with the real world. So why are certain ideas and concepts in fiction more dominant than others, and why don't others find themselves at the fore more? Certain narrative concepts are always going to be front and centre simply because good, reliable stories can stem from them. The knight rescuing the princess from the dragon, for a hackneyed example. You can also get some good stories by subverting that narrative. The princess rescuing the knight from the dragon, or the dragon rescuing the knight from the princess, for example. But the first one is a classic for a good reason. Danger, romance, a hero. So after we've done all those derivations and perversions and twists on the story, we tend to come back to that first one. Of course, now we're told that it's sexist, trite, possibly cruel to animals given the fate of the dragon, and how this kind of structure should now be entirely excised from the canon. This is a move that reduces variety and doesn't expand it, yet it comes from people who want to talk to you about diversity. And there's a catch-22 there. Two catch-22s, in fact. Catch-44. People want diversity in protagonists, but they want it on their terms, and they seem to want everything to include it. When you do include someone of a different colour, culture or sexuality than yourself, it's appropriation, or you're doing it incorrectly somehow. There's also a problem in the claim that representation is that important in the first place, in and of itself. If it's so important, then why, in the West, would any creative enterprise risk its core audience, which remains predominantly white male and nebulously middle class, by chasing the presumed dime of much smaller demographics? Gay, blind, wheelchair-bound Asians, or something. Fortunately, I think this claim is absolute toss. I think most people who haven't been politicised on this issue are fairly happy to play characters of all colours, genders, sexual persuasions, and even species. So where does this leave us today? We have a powerful, but not that big, group of people who seem to want a homogenised, safe space within all fiction. These are the people who turfed Jonathan Ross out of hosting the Hugos. These are the people calling for trigger warnings on university reading material. Whether you're a Scalzi or a Day, the issue is the same, thinking the material that doesn't agree with your point of view shouldn't exist, and fighting, often very nastily, to try and achieve that end. The Scalzis have the upper hand, and while that might seem like a good thing if you know anything about Vox Day, the Scalzis of this world seem to me to be less tolerant of anything that doesn't match up to their politics or their dubious meta-analysis. The sad thing for me is that this isn't a revolution, it's a counter-revolution. This is the ghost of John J. Pierce whining about the cynicism and edginess of science fiction's new wave, only this time the Pierces are rolling back all over the progress we've made over the last 50 years through the likes of Ellison, Merrill, Ballard and Vonnegut, and replacing dangerous visions with insipid visions. Fiction in all forms was probably more genuinely progressive and revolutionary in 1967 than it is today, and that's really, really depressing. Is there hope? I don't know. There seems to be something going on in the computer gaming community, some kind of call to arms against the meta-cultural criticism that's being used to slam games and, by extension, computer gamers. Maybe that can and will spread back out into other forms of fiction again, and save us all. Stop mistaking safety for comfort. A safe space can be used to explore uncomfortable, useful, wonderful, terrifying things, and without doing that, what's the point of it? Say something offensive, take a risk, fuck the meta-analytical progressive commissars and do something genuinely progressive. Push the edge, put someone's nose out of joint, say something dangerous for once.